grateful for walking with me today, my Father. This evening plea for peace. Tonight is no simple turning of the sky. It is a holy pause at the sunset of a day that God has already journeyed through with you. Before you close your eyes, before tomorrow calls, before you count your flaws or grieve the incomplete, pause and remember the Father has carried you. From the first blush of dawn that kissed my window, you were there. You were the melody that stirred my soul and the fortress lending me courage to stand. Amidst the day's chaotic currents, when raging tempests sought to shatter my faith, you were the anchor holding me fast. When my mind tangled in choices and the heavy burdens of labor, you were the compass pointing me true. Thank you, my Father, for never abandoning me to the wolves of worry, but for being my invisible shield, the steadfast friend who catches me before my step can falter. And now, as the veil of twilight descends and your lanterns hang in the heavens, I lift to you my evening cry, a plea for peace. The peace this fractured earth, scarred by violence and strife, so desperately craves. The peace exhausted and trembling hearts beg for. O Father of comfort, flood my heart first with your peace that transcends all logic. Bestow the interior calm that hushes the howling tempests within my spirit, making my soul a haven of rest. Quench with your soothing grace the smoldering embers of grudges glowing unnoticed in my depths, and cleanse with your forgiveness any spite or weariness gathered in the shadows of the day. O Sovereign Lord, I plead by the harmony you left us, that you blanket my household, my kin, and my cherished ones with peace. Transform our walls into an impenetrable refuge against dread. I also beseech you to spill your peace upon this shattered world. For every city crushed by rubble, for every orphan shivering without a blanket, and for every father weeping bitterly over his fallen child, I cry out, O Lord, show compassion and bestow your peace. Make this night a cradle for forgiveness, for releasing old wounds, and for penning a fresh chapter with the ink of tenderness. The peace I seek is not simply the hushing of chaos or the ceasing of gunfire, but that holy saturation that fills every emptiness. That deep certainty wrapping the spirit when it knows without a doubt that you are the reigning king, and the guardian who never closes his eyes. As shadows stretch and the world's clamor dissolves, nothing lingers but my soul pulsing with your name. In this hushed sanctuary, I offer my night prayer. Night is a chamber of mysteries, a season for unmasked communion with you, a time to shed the disguises we drape over ourselves for the world by daylight. O my beloved, sleep is a faint echo of death, a total yielding to your will. As I lay my head upon my pillow, I surrender wholly to you. I commend to you my breath, my mind, my flesh, and my unfolding tomorrow. I place in your hands every knot of the day I could not untie, and every weight that dragged upon my spine. Take them, Lord, for they have no place in your presence. I entreat in this night prayer that you shield me from every evil and every shadowed notion. Guard my steps and my resting, and preserve my dear ones in their scattered places. Remember, O Lord, every soul keeping watch through this darkness, the afflicted groaning in pain, the wayfarers navigating the roads, and the sentinels watching over our slumber. Lay your comforting palm upon them, and grant them a measure of relief and stillness. Make this night, O my Master, a mentor instructing me in stillness, so that in its quiet I may detect the breathing of your Spirit. Teach me that the darkness does not frighten you, and that midnight and daylight are identical in your sight, both resonating with your praise. Purify my conscience of any daytime transgression, and bathe me in the dew of your grace, so that I may rise tomorrow like a blossomed flower ready to greet its Maker. Thank you, my Father, for walking beside me today. And just as you escorted me through the crowded hours of the day, I pray that you sit with me through the solitary watches of the night. Hold my hand as I close my eyes. Be the final vision before slumber embraces me, and the first gladness I awaken to when the new dawn breaks anew. In your holy name, in the name of your unfailing devotion, in the name of your peace that surpasses all understanding, I pray and offer my thanks. Amen.